Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new edition of the Uprera Talks. My name is Anka Anton. I'm the Director of Public Relations and Administration in Uprera. So, if you are joining us for the first time, let me introduce the association. So, UPRERA is the European Public Relations Education and Research Association, currently with around 500 members in about 40 countries. Our members are both academics and professionals, primarily from Europe, but our membership does go beyond the continent. UPRERA's focus is on fostering a community that is really passionate about research and about education in public relations and strategic communication in other fields. We do that primarily through our thematic networks, which one of them will actually present today, and as well through projects. But we do that also during our annual Congress and the related activities. And this year, for example, the Congress will take place in Malaga, in Spain, between September 16th and 19th. And you can find more information about the UPERA Congresses both on our website and on social media, primarily on LinkedIn. So today we are going to hear from the Public Affairs and Lobbying Network, which is one of the UPRERA thematic networks, the research networks, and is one of the networks that you can meet and find out more about during the Congress. We have network meetings. You will see networks presenting, interacting with the members. So if you are curious about that, don't hesitate to look for more information on our website and join us for the Congress. So that being said, it is my pleasure to give the floor to the moderator of today's UPRERA Talk, Scott Davidson, who will tell you more about the network, the topic, and of course the speakers. Thank you very much for joining us, and don't forget to check out some of the other episodes of this UPRERA webinar series on our YouTube channels. Have a great webinar.
Thank you, Anka. Thank you for that. So, for that introduction, I'm Scott Davidson. I'm here through my role in our UPRERA network on public affairs and lobbying. And as the title suggests, that's where colleagues who have a particular interest in public affairs and lobbying practice within strategic communication and public relations we can come together. We have quite a few years now where we've worked together and produced collaborations. We've worked on research projects together. We've organized various UPRERA panels, even gone to other conferences, done shared journal editions, and our work is ongoing. And what you will see today is a kind of shorter webinar version of the panel that we'd organized for the UPRERA Congress in Lund last September, on the theme of around populism, because we had noticed that whilst populism, of course, is a big theme for our age across Europe, but we'd started to notice instances and examples in public affairs and kind of policy and issue campaigning, which raised kind of many questions. And so we invited colleagues to kind of present ideas and work. And so what we would do is we'll start off with myself and Chiara Valentini, looking at generally kind of what do we mean by populism in lobbying, and then Irina Larkin-Lucille-Desmoulins will also present on aspects to do with its manifestations in France and through lobbying of Airbnb. Just to say at the end, I'll say this at the end, but is there anybody here who's not already in the network or not already aware, please just email me if you want to be added to our mailing list, and I'm interested in participating in the future. So, okay, so I think this could be us, Chiara. I think I can see you've popped up on the screen. So that means, are we ready to go? Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you virtually.
Yeah, and nice to see you again. So is it up to me to put the slides on? Is that mine? Oh, no, there you go. That was just, yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm going to hand over to Chiara. I think you're going to introduce us, and I'm going to come back again. Yeah.
We try to get this as a dialogue and engage in a conversation, me and Scott, with you on this topic. Our point of departure, so Scott said that we present an early version of this last year at the Congress, and we have been working through also to improving and making more solid. Actually, the paper now is already under review in a journal, so we hope later on to share with the UPRERA community member, hopefully, an accepted paper in print during this year. So what is our work about? Well, first of all, we start to be very pragmatic in thinking that I must say that it's obvious that we are living a very peculiar, particular time internationally, and the rise of populism everywhere. It's on the rose. I mean, it's quite obvious that many organizations, institutions, politicians, and you name it, are tapping into this populist discourses. So if we think about research and how we contribute to the field of public affairs lobbying, obviously starting thinking what's happening in our society, in our organizations, in the context, and in the moment we are living is the key point. As a good researcher, we always start with a question. You cannot study empirically something if you first don't clarify what are you studying, what are the research gaps, so what are the concepts you are looking, and so on. So we did these exercises, me and Scott, and start thinking we need really to clarify what we mean from populism in the context of public affairs or lobbying, and what are the implications that we can deduct, we can see also based on previous research. And this is basically the background of our paper. Scott, please, next slide. So it's a conceptual paper we worked on, and we tried really to do an exercise of synthesis and theory extraction, knowledge extractions around the concept of populism. But we had also another purpose, not just to synthesize this body of literature, but to try to create a type, what we call a typology of populism lobbying research, which we will share with you all during this presentation, which hopefully can clarify also what are the research gaps and where we need to pay attention, and what might be interesting opportunity for developing this field. Next slide, Scott. To do this kind of work, we base on the literature, with a methodological approach that is quite consolidated in management literature. So Jaakkola has a very nice paper reviewing this idea of synthesizing literature for theory development. And we also rely on Alvesson and Sandberg work, very famous scholars, to have developed this idea of problematizations methodology, which is a way of thinking. How do we critically assess the knowledge we have, and how do we reframe the fundamental assumptions of this knowledge within a different context? In our case, it was public affairs and lobbying. We did obviously use our Scopus, one of the databases, to search. When we start looking this, it was a little bit challenging, I must say, to create also the keywords, because populism research is very well established in political science and political communication. But when you move in other boundaries, it's a bit more blurred, also in terms of definitions and usage. So we had to play a bit around. And we obviously done the process multiple times. We did a critical analysis of what we have identified there, and we primarily focus, and probably this is a limitation, on English materials. So obviously there is probably, or the most likely, other publication and material that is important in other language which we haven't considered. Next slide. So out of this data set, which I also want to stress that we did manually, so no AI to do this, we came up with three main dimensions. Let's say the literature across the fields seems to talk about these three specific dimensions of populism. Populism as ideology, populism as a strategy, and populism as a rhetorical style. And I will pass now the word to Scott, who will tell you a little bit more about these three dimensions.
Thank you, Chiara. Yes, so just moving on, so the kind of results of this kind of structured literature review that we undertook, and we found these three kind of main themes. and dimensions. And firstly, perhaps most unsurprising is that a lot of literature is concerned with trying to understand populism as an ideology. And what we found is actually there's a kind of that there's not agreement on this as such. Is this really an ideology? And then it tends to be through writers such as Cass Mudder and others. Actually, it's not quite the same as other developed ideologies. And there's this idea of the thin-centered ideology is a language which is used quite widely within the literature. And that is to say that it's not an ideology in and of itself, because we can observe that, populism can be, left-wing or right-wing. It can even have environmentalist populism as well. So it is something that can attach to other more developed ideologies. What is common to this kind of the idea of populism is some kind of narrative, that there is a tension in the society or some kind of struggle between the people and the elite. And this tension extends to the idea of sovereignty. The people are the sovereigns. The democracy should respond to the people, and yet somehow within liberal democratic systems, the law, the constitution, the courts are somehow preventing or blocking the will of the people. The will of the people is known. Come on, let's get on with it. Let's do it. But it's the elites, blocking everything, and it's just this kind of feeling in terms of which can be mobilized on the left and on the right, and that not just in communication scholarship or strategic communication scholarship, but in other fields as well, it is recognized that populism is highly communicative. That you have to understand populism. You cannot really look at it without the communicative dimension, which of course is very interesting for us. And so, kind of this communicative style that appeals to the people and is anti-elitism. The less predictable, but really, really interesting, I think, for colleagues in UPrera and then for this network, is that we find literature identifying populism is a strategy, is a strategic thing to do. So around the idea of risk management. So there's the risk of you work in public affairs. What are you going to do about these populists? Are they a risk to you and your organization? How are you going to deal with that risk? Or, if we are to adopt, are we, to closer relationships with populists, is that a risk to us in terms of our reputation? So the examples we found in some of the literature is where corporate social responsibility is being altered or adjusted as part of a risk management strategy, if you like, and one example we cite is in the United States. In response to the Trump regime, we see a lot of organizations withdrawing from their environmental commitments as they see it being too risky. They don't want to be targeted by the regime. We see it as mobilization. So if you want to mobilize public support or employees or other communities, this kind of language is very motivational. We want you to join in. We want you to take actions, come to events, support us online. It helps to mobilize. Or it can be about positioning, positioning your desired kind of image in relation to, in quotations, the people. Where does our organization stand in relationship to this idea that people should be sovereign? Finally, the third thing was rhetorical style. And there's a lot of literature around this, that it's highly performative. There is a performative use of emotion, sometimes in all languages. The idea of kind of speaking in a very kind of ordinary language, not the language of the educated elite, to break the norms of good behavior in public life is actually quite a good thing to do. It kind of shows who you are. Antagonism. So in the language, it's about grievance and resentment. Look what they have done. Look what they are doing. We find interest in vertical and downward othering. So the elites are othered, that they are perceived as not representing the people or blocking the will of the people. And of course, there is the downward othering, that there are It could be immigrants or social deviants of some kind, and the elites are too lenient on them. They care about them more than the ordinary person in Middle England, Middle Italy, Middle France, wherever. Yeah. And then there's the kind of language sense. So there's kind of the experts, including the academics. Are they, the obscure knowledge? What about common sense of the ordinary people? Isn't that more important? The kind of privileging of that dimension. And so, oops, that slide's pretty poor. So I'll move over to you, Chiara, for these next two slides. Yeah.
Thank you, Scott. There are some lines on the slide, but hopefully you can get a little bit what we mean. So what we did after this analysis, identification, these dimensions, try to think about what element can we use for defining this phenomenon and this practice that is becoming more and more common. And this practice is the populist lobbying, which is a form of lobbying. So we came up with this definition you see on the slides, with populism lobbying defined as a strategic and purposeful position in an organization interest in relation to a specific issue, cause, policy, or political elite. This first part of the definition is very similar as we think about what is the purpose of strategic communication. But I think what it comes here, the more specific element of this definition, is that this kind of usage of lobbying must be highly performative and emotionally charged. The same as Scott mentioned just a moment ago. It has to have this element that bring the attention, that raise emotions, that mobilize people to do something or to think about it. We see this is a very contextual and situational, and it generally a very, very common characteristic is that this kind of lobbying need to be framed in opposition of something. It could be in opposition to an external group, whether are the immigrants, whether it's a political opponent or anything, but it needs to be framed as an opposition. And it's very much strategic in the use, because they use it for legitimize their stances, their interest in, to create also communality or equivalence with the person, the group, the target publics they want to gain support. So this is our definition. Next. And based on that, we try to think about how do we move then the research forwards, how to get to know more about this phenomenon of populism lobbying. And we came out with this table, which I will not be able to explain in short time. I will just give you an idea as what is all about this table. So because we are academics, obviously we're interested in theory development. We had to plug in an element of theoretical objectives. And so we thought about what normally a researcher would think about. And normally, we can think about how can we develop a normative theory that explain, at least idealistically, how particular practice, activities, or phenomenon is happening. We can have a descriptive theory where the purpose is to try to explain or showing what is happening in a particular situation, context. Or we can have an instrumental theory where we want to forecast or preview the consequence, the effect of specific actions. That's instrumental theory. To that, we added another theoretical objective that is an overall objective for the field of public affairs. We create this matrix where we cross these three theoretical purposes or objectives with three perspectives around populism that we have seen from the literature. We see are also important if we take the point of departure of communication professional. As a communication professional, obviously we are very keen to have a managerial implication, managerial reflection. So how can we use this for our organization? And that's in our middle column here. But we should have also an outward thinking. We need to have a societal reflection. How does our action produce consequences for society, for citizens, for the publics we are doing? And that's the very right column. And finally, we think it's also important to develop a research agenda on the concept itself of populism, and that's the first column. And for these three perspectives, we propose some macro general questions according to the theoretical perspective, normative, descriptive, instrumental, which we think could be just a starting point to carry out research. Scott, next.
Thank you. Yes, so just to conclude, kind of lead into the kind of few discussion points that come from this research. First of all, is that we kind of argued at the end of the paper that actually we shouldn't look as populism as, that organizations are populist or not populist in their strategies and the language that they might use in their communication, that it can exist in a kind of contingent kind of way. It can be partially present or it can be really fully present. We thought that was an important distinction to make. It is situational and contingent. I'm conscious of time, so I won't sit too long on that slide. And this finally has kind of wider discussion points. This is, what is the social responsibility, if you like, of using language in your communications and lobbying, which accentuates social division, or it gives new energy to say distrust of institutions and elites. So not that we have I think there's a right or wrong answer there, but it's something to reflect upon and could be researched more. We clearly identify that CSR is under pressure. Under populism, firms are scaling back CSR commitments under populist regimes, particularly around net zero. Lobbying legitimacy. It's very interesting that often lobbyists are seen as illegitimate. People don't really trust lobbyists. Who are they? What are they doing? But now we have lobbying saying actually, the policymakers are the ones illegitimate because we are the representatives, which is a really interesting dimension to what we're finding. And finally, what does this say about our normative ideas that the organizations contribute very rationally to policy discussions, and then you're bringing in a kind of lobbying and a kind of ethos which is very skeptical of scientific knowledge and expertise, and what might be the consequences of that. So I'm going to finish there because I think we wanted to not go more than 15 minutes, and we can come back in terms of the questions. But there's that final slide, which is kind of a similar kind of questions. But I think we'll finish there, and then we'll move on, and we can, if people have questions, we can pick up other dimensions and say a bit more in that part of the of this webinar. Anyway, thank you for. I was going to say, in a very populist way, thank you for your attention. As a certain populist finishes his messages. Anyway, thank you for your attention to this matter, and we'll move on to Lucille.
Hello. So I go back to my first slide. Thank you for hosting me. And as Scott said, I'm a researcher from a French Parisian university, and I could not make it to Lund due to wide shortcuts. So it's nice for me to be there. And it's also nice to see that many of the theoretical aspects analyzed by Chiara and Scott, you will find them back again in my paper, and we did not plan this, so it's good. So this is a short version of a work on the French livestock trade organization lobbying and their grassroots lobbying strategy. What I would try to show is that this lobbying taps into cultural divides over food, divides between urban and countryside lives, between conception of French national identity. In this case, populist arguments and populist rhetoric are accurate reading reads to study French livestock industry thoughts, and still fights. They still fight for so that plant-based food products, sometimes designed to look like meats, sometimes designed to taste like meat, they should not be called vegan ham, a vegan burger, or vegan steak. So that's the overall subject. I chose to start this presentation with this image you can see of Henry IV, first Bourbon king, born Protestant, raised Catholic. He switched many times, and is associated with religious wars, of course. But this is not important for the topic, because French people mostly remember him because the way he died, was murdered, because he signed the Edit de Nantes, the edict for the pacification, authorizing Protestant worship under very specific conditions. But also he brought an end to 3 decades of religious war, and is mostly famous not for that, but because of his diet and his gastronomy preferences in France. He used to love poule au pot, like chicken in a pot. And all French people would remember a quote, probably apocryphal, is, "If God grants me more life, I will ensure that there is no peasant in my kingdom who does not have the means to have a chicken in his pot on Sundays." No matter this, the historical accuracy, this is very important to understand French livestock industry lobbying and its populist tendencies. How so? So this quote reflects the fact that Henry IV, he enjoys a very good image as a ruler because he was supposedly concerned with the well-being of common people and also obviously a pragmatist. It also reflects an association of a diet, including meat, with health, with wealth, with top-notch French typical gastronomy and heritage, associated also with peace after wars, after starvation, and then associated with the right to enjoy a day off as prescribed by the Bible, and with the Catholic religion as key to French identity. So if you understand that, you understand the debates on populism in my area, and you understand the title of this presentation. So I go to next slide, and I will be very short. I studied merely a few position papers, a few books, press released, because many of position papers and so on, they are not really populist anyhow, but some are very much populist. So that's why I called this a cherry-picking corpus. But I could not focus only on the agriculture trade unions, livestock trade unions, or butcher trade unions. I had to study the speeches of many parties involved, like the minister, the NGOs, the agitators, and even some people I call the theoreticians. And you find back again a conception of populism with 2 sides. I did not separate ideology, strategy, and rhetoric. First, I had the arguments, and the arguments is like a very idealized, romantic vision of French great history with a generalization, exaggeration, frustration, and fear to lose one's identity. Always references to a past life, trad life, that very nostalgic and backward looking. And then there's the we against them, anti-elite, very conspiracy rhetoric, with blue colors opposed to intellectuals, decent working people with Catholic values, with extremely greedy criminals, and many kinds of binary separation. You can think one is I tell this for fun because we, the French people, we are Latin people and we enjoy life, whereas the sad vegan, they are sententious and probably they are all from Northern Europe. And then the third argument is violence. And you could see this argument on violence, whether it is to call for violence and to denunciate violence. So it seems to be not okay to put this together, but it is for populist arguments. And then the second part is the expressive style with a specific linguistic markers, figurative language, theoretical lyricism, exaggeration, and all that. Clearly, it deviates from the typically polished style of position papers. And then there's the pathos, the emotions, and that's important. So I studied populism in lobbying rhetoric, but in all kind of populism ideology, you've got always reference to countryside life, rural life, agriculture. And there's another thing important is that not only populism is an interesting theoretical reading grids for us, but it is also something the people in the agriculture sector use as either an insult or a stigma. So an example for that is an interview given by former French agriculture minister. And the title of this newspaper, they chose this final sentence of the interview by this minister is, if you criticize our people working in farms, this is total populism. So if I translate just one small quotation, I knew it would be difficult for me as a minister to protect the people working in agriculture, but not that far. I mean, Parisian Bobo, they've got this vision of rural life that's kind of fancy, but they have difficulties accepting that the countryside, it's like noise and the machines and cows. So it's criticized here is a very famous stereotype. In English, it would be something like a hipster, but in French, it's like the bobo, bourgeoisie, bohemian people. And it's a social class, but it's also a way of life. And in this way of life, you've got the vegan diet. So people within the field use populist as a stigma. So it's not just me using it as a grid. I need to say a few words about the context. This was in 2012. In this example, you got Sodexo, a collective catering group, organizing days without meat and advertising for this event. And it was like very much attacked by cow breeders unions. They said something like, stop this defamatory bad campaign. Sodexo had to apologize, but who came to help Sodexo? No, not to help Sodexo, to help the unions of agriculture farmers and livestock farmers, the minister. And he said, behind this partisan, polemical and biased spirit of this unfortunate initiative, the method is deplorable. So this is that the style is not really typical for a minister. And you've got these arguments of the French culinary tradition already coming. Then later on, I need to tell you a bit more about what I call the slippery slope argument. And it was used first by an intellectuals, an inspirator of trade unions, of livestock and farm unions. And they associated plant-based protein products, many derived from soy, with attacks on what so-called anti-specious ideologies, and they framed it as an attack on French identity. And this writer of the book opened a letter to the people who eat meat, and they want to keep on doing so, and they don't want to be to feel guilty about it. He wrote this whole book, and this is a sociologist, is very famous in the agro-ecological movement, but he's very often invited to do key conferences, key lectures during agriculture fairs. So it's very famous as an inspirator. But on this book, he's using all day main populist argument you can think of. Very kind of scary book. So if you do the chronology of this lobbying matter issue, it's like amazing the number of twists and turns you've got. And when I started working on the topic like 2 years ago, I could never imagine what still happened during the last 2 years because things changed recently. And it's like a navette, a come and go movement between EU level, French level, and all the different French state council, a constitutional council you can imagine, to block text or to push forward text or to lower the pace or for that the text to be applied as far as the wording on the vegan steak and vegan ham is concerned. The slippery slope arguments is also important because of this background of vandalism on butchery shops. There were a few of them, not that many, but definitely when you read the letters, the position papers of the butcher unions, the livestock union, the agriculture unions, they always refer to their fight against the wording and the labeling of plant-based product as a vegan ham and so on. They always refer to this story of vandalism. And the link they make is very clear when you go through this title. The Parisian is like a kind of a populist newspaper in Paris, and you see the fallacious argument very clearly. First, they say it's violent. Yeah, there were flew blood on the shops, but not that many, in fact. But they say that they ask protection against vegan. So it's not like a few activists who did like actions, well, supposedly violent, but they feel threatened. So there's this kind of inversion of the stigma. We kill animals, we are not violent. You do like big, you lead to big traumatical, psychological trauma for the butchers and their family. So you are the violent ones. What struck me too is that with this populist rhetoric, they managed to put together two extremes of the political spectrum. They managed to bring back together ideas that usually don't go well together into a coherent narrative. So this is the case for a position paper by the Butcher Union. You find together references to the French Crusade, like very strong Catholic reference here. And then they also reference to the Estates General during the French Revolution, when the people like got very angry and said, okay, we don't want this and that. You need to follow this and that. So usually you don't find those two things together. But then there's always the very plain populist narrative on the past of the protection of the gastronomy that needs to be done by the state because the vegan people are obliging people to eat fake steaks, and the conspiracy theory comes behind, because if they want you to eat steak, it's because it's cheap, because you're poor, and because they want to keep the steak for themselves. It goes that far, the conspiracy movements. So you've got a lot of exaggeration, caricature, grandiloquence, and always a we versus them. We speak in the name of the real people. We are not the burbos. We want the Republican state to protect the right of the people to eat what they want and not be deceived by these labels of a vegan steak who are not real steak. So it's more in Paul Ariès that I found this very far-fetched argument of people and the working people being deprived from the right to eat real meat. The we against them, you find them in many press releases, many position papers. The Bobos, they are working for the EU, they are the civil servants in the EU, and don't understand our French countryside and our French right to enjoy life and be happy. This is kind of strange and fun, because most French ministers, and there were many for agricultures, they were on the side of the livestock unions. And for instance, this minister, Julien de Normandie, was caricature on Wikipedia pages by a Greenpeace former employee who did a bit of vandalism, and he changed the title of many ministers, saying like pro-meat, always meat for breakfast. But the unions, they did not react strongly on that, because they thought, ooh, that must be risky if people find out that we are hand in hand together with the ministers. So they chose this low-profile strategy. You've got a little bit of populism on the other side, the plant-based industry product, because they say we are health, we are well-being, we are care, we are sustainability, hence you're not all that. And they speak about violence a little bit in vocabulary and the fierce battles. So this was a victory last year, but recently the victory came to a very ambiguous new compromise in March. So now plant-based steak and plant-based bacon or ham, they are set to be banned in the EU. So now it's a win for the livestock, but you could still call the vegan sausage or vegetarian burger. So this is a kind of a win. And if you read the very recent press release and by the Butcher Union, you can find populist rhetoric back again. They speak about an acceptable fraud. They speak about mega transformed soya-based products. regular livestock and agriculture unions cannot speak about that because that's like anti-Asian, and we've got many people who own farms producing soy in France, so they cannot be too aggressive on that. And then you've got this idea of extreme rights and left brought together, and for the first time they praised the work of EU MPs, because now you've got a kind of populist EU MPs who are like the speak person for those unions. And at the end of the press release and the position paper, you've got also very vulgar vocabulary, because you need to know in France you've got many expression referring to steaks. Leave out the steaks and leave us alone. So you've got this kind of use of a very unusual rhetoric in the end of the press release, thing like we are winners, but the story is not over. I think many twists and turns should happen later on, and I'm done. Thank you for your attention.
Oh, thank you, Lucille. So I'm back on screen. And now we'll turn to Irina straight away.
Thank you, Scott. Yes, we will have another study about populism in action, actually, but maybe a bit more behaved or restrained than the example that Lucille just brought forward. But we will see that. This is a project and a study that we've been conducting in the context of Amsterdam and Airbnb's lobbying to prevent regulation on short-term renting, so their core business model. It's a project I've done together with Alex Schwinges, who is not here today, and also Emily van Gagern. Now, what is this all about? Airbnb, as you know, has had a huge success story in terms of its business model, namely renting out, private people renting out private houses to other people. Now, this has become a big business to such an extent that these short-term rental platforms, where Airbnb is actually the most, well, the market dominator, let's say, has actually led to the problems of over-tourism and rising housing costs. So some cities around the world and Europe have actually started to regulate short-term housing. And here, Amsterdam is one of the front runners. They have actually started to implement different sorts of regulation from 2017 onwards. So for the last roughly 10 years, they have been busy with that. And as a counter reaction, also Airbnb has been lobbying against such regulation, also for at least the past 10 years. Which is why in our research, when we actually focused on Amsterdam and the city council as kind of a key case to understand how do such big tech platforms actually argue when it comes to preventing regulation that actually threatens their business model. Now, we have been looking at that from a populist perspective. Why is that? Because when we were looking into this case, it kind of jumped in our faces that Airbnb is very much using populist arguments in their communication, both outside lobbying as well as inside lobbying, that remain to be seen, to rationalize their engagement. They, for instance, always refer to the ordinary Europeans that are their hosts, but also their guests. And they also refer to the grievances that they actually help alleviate for hosts, because they can make some money from their private houses and therefore kind of balance out rising living costs in Europe. So we did look into that Airbnb case in Amsterdam theoretically, and I won't go a lot into that now, from a corporate populism perspective, a populist political communication perspective, and of course lobbying. And when I look back at Scott's and Chiara's paper, I think we are not so much in the populist as ideology, but we're really in the stage of populist as rhetorics here. And we wanted to understand which populist argumentation strategies Airbnb actually uses in both the inside and outside lobbying in order to counter threatening regulation. And how did we do that? We looked both into inside lobbying documents via Freedom of Information requests and also policy position papers by Airbnb over a period of roughly 10 years. We did content analysis qualitatively of this material, looking into both populist messages. Populists very much revert to the people. We have seen that also in Lucille's presentation right now. Sovereignty of the people, blaming the elite and excluding specific people from the people. We also have in populist styles such as being very negative, very emotional, or very sociable. And what we found also in this material was that they also very much argue for as being a partner, as being for the common good, such a, let's say, also a public interest argument. And for the sake of time, I'll jump immediately to the conclusions. What we did is we kind of captured these variables, this content from the data, and then looked at it from a rhetorical perspective, meaning that we looked into how is ethos, logos, and pathos employed in lobbying by Airbnb in this specific case. First of all, however, we have to understand what are the objectives that Airbnb is actually pursuing in its lobbying. You would have assumed, well, most likely it's really business threatening regulation for them. So it has gone as far that today in Amsterdam, if you own a house there, you can rent it out for 15 days a year. So that practically kills the market for Airbnb. So it's really business threatening regulation. And we thought, okay, well, then the objective is most likely that they are going harshly against it, but it is actually not so much the case. They're doing it in a smarter way. They try to accept and embrace regulation and say, but of course it needs to be changed a little bit. And in order to rationalize and to argue for this lobbying objective, they do use two focal ways of lobbying argumentation. On the one hand, they refer to their ethos, so who they are as a communicator and as a lobbyist, as a political player, and they say, we are your partners. We're not your antagonists, but we are your partners. We have always cared about the people, the Amsterdammers. We have been caring about the ordinary European, and we have had a good relationship in the past. So we want to be the partners for you as a regulator to move forward together. And to substantiate that argument, they are actually using in their main topos. On the one hand, they say, well, if we are your partners, then there's of course also an elite, an antagonist, and that would be the hotel chains. Those big hotel chains who are actually the ones who are culpable, also the culprits of the rising housing costs and over tourism. It's not us. And because we actually support the ordinary Amsterdammer and also the ordinary European to actually make ends meet and to sustain an economic lifeline. So they're trying to kind of come close to or empowering the regular people. So kind of saying, okay, we are the ones who actually empower regular people, the ordinary person, while hotel chains are the ones who are actually detrimental to city development. So Airbnb on the one hand also then tries to speak for them when they say, oh, it is an economic necessity to rent out your private homes. That's what they're doing there, is actually that they're speaking for them rather than as a platform. So that's an interesting mix of how they use and how they employ this populist argument. They also do use a little bit of pathos argumentation, so emotional, putting forward emotional host narratives, about personal hardship, but this is very much contained to outside lobbying. So everything that is directed to the outside, to the public, they don't use that at all in inside lobbying. So when they talk to lawmakers, policymakers in the city council or in the city, they don't really use this argumentation, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. Now, I'll wrap this up rather quickly such that we can go into the discussion. What we find in terms of key takeaways is that the corporate populism that we see from Airbnb in the Amsterdam case is different than the political populism that has been established in the literature. We have hotel chains, big corporate players as the elite, which is ironic if you think about it. But it's not an attack on political institutions, rather it's kind of the framing as a partner of the regulator. And what we also find is that we have this power of platforms in our society that is already quite immense. Is on the one hand, of course, infrastructural, because they actually built the infrastructure for this business to work, but they also at the same time then take over part of the sovereignty of people by doing this, by claiming the citizen speak, by claiming to speak for the ordinary person who lives in the city and who rents out their homes, in order to kind of establish further credibility for their message. So this is it from us. Thank you very much, and I'll give back to Scott for the discussion.
Thank you very much, Irina, and thanks to Lucille as well. You know, if a couple of years ago we asked the question, you know, is there populism in lobbying? Is it happening? And it's just beyond doubt, isn't it? You kind of look at the French example, or the big tech companies and Airbnb. It's really clear that this is something that's happening, and it's clearly of interest to us in public affairs and lobbying, but I think probably wider for strategic communication academics and practitioners as well. So we've got just 5 or 6 minutes left now. Is there any? I can't see who's out there from while I'm looking on the software here. So, is there anybody out there who would like to ask a question or come in? Can people do that, or do they have to submit them by the comments box at all? If not, we can have a little discussion together. I can't see anything at the moment. Okay, thank you. So, can I just have this little discussion from yours, Lucille, because I hadn't seen yours before. So sad you couldn't be with us in Lund. It's so much evidence, and it's so interesting. So les bobos, they are the elite, with their vegan food and everything. Terrible people, very not real French, I guess. But I'm really impressed. As in, there's so much lobbying on food names and food definitions, and this seems to be a massive area of populism. And so, is there anything else that you didn't get a chance to say on that? But just lobbying on the name, and this idea of like a true French person as well is so fascinating.
I did not go. I did not deep dive into all the kind of funny wordings in the position papers, but yeah, I could read stuff that were kind of amazing. I really need to go back to the fact that many position papers I could not include them in the corpus because they were not populist at all, or I need to address the fact that there are not so many position papers written because all those unions, they have got a free seat at the minister. So they don't need to write papers because they're there already. They are inside. They are insiders. What I could add is you've got some new movement raising, for instance, the butcher working for halal products, and they're kind of powerful within the union of the butcher. And so in the position paper about the crusade, you've got a full paragraph about the Muslim people and their right to eat lamb. So they kind of incorporate diets arguments for Muslim people, whereas on the title of the position paper, you've got the word crusade. Like, amazing how they managed to put all the things together. So the topic is kind of complex, because if you go to the top level, for instance, the agriculture union, you've got people working in the soy for the soy producers in France. So sometimes it's difficult to understand how they manage to make those writings happen, because the confusion and the contradiction are so important. And yeah, that may be a first way to answer your question. The second one is, I received 2 weeks ago an invitation by French major union of lobbyists, the union of lobbyists, and they invited me to a seminar about ethical and populism. So we are not the only one worrying and questioning our practices. So I would be very happy to talk to you about this seminar, because I will definitely make my best to be able to attend.
It's really interesting. So that's the industry and practitioners themselves wanting to talk about this, which is that's
and
really
they invited the people in charge of master degrees, and they don't always invite us. We are we've got a special status within the union, observers. So, well, when they want to discuss like key questions, we are not invited. This time we are.
Okay. Well done. Yeah. So, and it's the hour is up. I don't know if any other questions that we have for each other. I can't see any comments coming in. But I've enjoyed this. It feels really significant. It feels like this is a trend that I think. I wonder if there's colleagues out there. We haven't really looked at this. I don't know if people agree, or maybe it's me making assumptions. That I always assumed, that the idea of lobbying was very technocratic, and it was supposed to be very rational and deliberative, and and this is how we justify what we do. This is our contribution. But the populism kind of takes us into. This is not that model, is it? This is it's a different kind of way of contributing to public sphere. Be interested if people want to explore that.
Maybe we lost our specificity. There is no more group interest lobbying. We all do grassroots lobbying, and then it is a 360 degrees PR, and that's all. We're just maybe we merge into the bigger group more than we used to do.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good observation, actually. Yeah. So I think we'll finish here, unless anybody urgently would like to ask a question. We'll finish on time.
Perhaps can I ask you one question, because we have seen some example here, but I was wondering if someone has an idea about the results or the effectiveness of some of these populist lobbying strategy. Have they produced some results in terms of where these companies or organization aim? That's probably for both of you, Irina and Lucille, because our is conceptual. We have not that result yet, but it will be interesting to see if this produces any kind of effort.
Question into effect is super interesting, of course. If we only look at the Airbnb case, you could doubt effectiveness because you would see that the regulation has been increasing and increasing. But in other cases of big tech lobbying, I would say that very often populist claims do their work. And then also, however, we have, and we see also more and more of those cases reverting to populist frames and arguments. So there must be something to it. But I don't know of studies who have tested that in our context or in the PR context in general. So I think that's the next step to go, Chiara.
Thank you.
Same for me. The agriculture issue, they're very special, and I think, maybe there's a little bit more of populism now, but like 20 years ago, soft populism was already there, because the question of the heritage and the tradition was already there.
Yeah, I think it's obviously there's the dark side of populism, and it's just this othering that the elites or les bobos or others, their loyalty is not to the countries. It's like they have a foreign loyalty. It's something else, and I think you can see that at play. They're somehow not true Amsterdammers, or the loyalty is somewhere else, isn't it? I think anyway, I don't want to finish on the dark side, but that's obviously where things can go horribly wrong, and it's kind of corrosive. But me and Chiara did in our paper kind of say sometimes you can make the argument that technocratic elites do need a metaphorical kick-in sometimes. There's always cozy and the ordinary voice is, you could argue, has been ignored, and that the everyday lived experience of citizens is not really being incorporated into the policy making. But yeah, so there's my little bit of balance there to finish the to finish the session off. Anyway, thank you everybody. Thank you for those who are watching us, and we'll complete the session there. And as I say, if you want to join the network, look us up or find me and just send me an email, and I'll add you to our email list, and you'll be invited to future events and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.